So this is just coming up to 9:30 in the morning and 09:30 hours GMT in the morning of Friday, the 2nd of July, 2021. And this is part A of the KHOODEELAAR television channel, continuing the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And today's papers are obviously not reporting anything about the West Yorkshire by-election in the West Yorkshire parliamentary constituency of Batley and Spen that took place yesterday, Thursday, the 1st of July. And by this morning, by about between 5 and 6, the result of the election was announced, confirming that the candidate carrying the Labour Party's nomination, Kim Leadbitter, had won by more than 300 vote majority. Now, the online coverage so far refers to the phrase narrow majority. And we have already rejected that because the system of election under which this particular by-election took place is one that is called simple majority, which means a majority of one is enough to constitute victory. And every newspaper, so-called Fleet Street, should have known that. Any website or web social media post or account that is operated by anyone remotely kind of aware about basic facts should have avoided narrow majority, number one, because it was immaterial. Many of the current kind of collection of MPs from all kinds of parties have got similar numbers, if not 300, but similar, very near. And they should not be described with that stupid, diverting qualification, which is to undermine the impact of the particular outcome in the Batley by-election. And I shall be coming to that shortly. The financial crimes is continuing to be in denial of climate emergency because the rate at which the environment is warming up is alarmingly fast, and every day it is getting faster. So these people who are talking about the manipulation of the market and the deception of the customers, the ordinary people, they should stop ignoring the melting of the planet, which is happening. It's not a joke, it's not a trend, it's not some kind of fancy slogan. And the newspapers, Fleet Street, when we said that we are doing the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, we are doing the world exclusive diagnosis of a sick press. It's not one item, it's not one topic, it's not one page, it's not one exceptional, rare incident of lying and denying. It's overwhelmingly unwell. That is to say, it's overwhelmingly lying, Fleet Street. And the fact that there are papers like the Yorkshire Post in the Yorkshire area, based in Leeds in Yorkshire, and they're called, the titles are given regional names, doesn't make them regional, doesn't make them different at all. They are following the same lying, in denial, stupid, ignorant agenda and narrative and language and phrases. And of course, they're all racist. Why is it important? Because of racism, the Western media and the Western so-called political decision makers and the Western criminally active and engaged financial outlets, they are allowing the damage to be done to the huge parts of the planet, Africa, Asia, and the rest of the so-called Latin America and the North American kind of parts. Canada, this very time, Canada is literally exploding. Many people are absolutely desperate. Canada and parts of the USA, huge parts of the USA, are literally exploding in the heat right now, this minute. So it's not like something secret, something hidden is happening. It is absolutely bursting. And yet these Fleet Street newspapers are operating in absolute denial of that. And the rest of the media, so-called the broadcasting counterparts of Fleet Street, doing the same. The amount of time and the space that they gave to the by-election in the last, let's say, 2-3 weeks, that has now been concluded at Batley and Spen, is absolutely unjustifiably out of proportion and false, because the main line, which must have been manufactured in a factory and then imprinted on all the Fleet Street outlets, was Keir Starmer is going to be humiliated at Batley and Spen, or Keir Starmer will be replaced as the leader of the Labour Party, or Keir Starmer is braced for defeat at Batley and Spen. We never believed that that would happen. There are two things here. First of all, the by-election was not about Keir Starmer. Quite literally, it wasn't about Keir Starmer. And secondly, Keir Starmer couldn't influence anything in Battalion Spen. And he hasn't. What has happened and who are the people that have actually done the defense of the seat for the candidate carrying the card of the Labour Party are the local people. And in the context of the parasite, George Galloway's parasitic interference, Galloway has been defeated by the mobilization of the Muslim voters in Battalion Spen, done by a number of Muslim Labour Party members, mainly women. And they have seen off George Galloway. Now, this program is clearly kind of broadcast without the decorations in the background. One of the reasons is, of course, logistics. And the other thing is that we concentrate on getting the facts right. And we are engaged in a world exclusive program of enlightening anyone who watches this, either while it is live or later. They will not get this content anywhere else. This approach, this diagnosis, this evidence. And this is the Guardian about Canada. And of course, this is the Guardian front page. This is the only paper that is doing this, but still not connecting the destruction of the climate with the politics. And there is a piece, the second piece on the front page of The Guardian is about Afghanistan. Say that foreign troops heading home and the Afghan villagers are taking on the Taliban. Now, it's not just Afghanistan. Civilians are taking on the role in various other countries not far from Afghanistan. And in the context of the lockdown, something new is happening in Bangladesh. New meaning things like public demonstrations every day, and things like increasingly direct kind of challenges to the government. That hasn't happened for the last 15 years. These are happening in Bangladesh, but the events are not being recognized by Fleet Street, and they're not being recognized by the social media either. And the reason why that is not happening, the reporting of what is happening in Bangladesh, is a number of things. First of all, Bangladesh is seen as a colony in terms of the attitude, as a colony in all senses by the Western countries. And Bangladesh is being seen as a satellite state in all but name. Satellite state of the next door, much bigger state of India. And the agenda of the corrupt, criminal, racist, imperialistic, in denial Fleet Street, the agenda that has been followed for the last 75 years, let's say, by Fleet Street about the subcontinent, is to placate, accommodate, make excuses for, and exaggerate the value to the West, to the UK, of India at the expense of the next door countries to India. That agenda is continuing to be perpetrated by the Fleet Street and the mainstream media in the West. And the same applies to the big tech companies that control access to the available content online, the most notorious being Google. Now, Google's CEO is an Indian, but that is not a coincidental issue. Google CEO does interfere with the contents and the service and the access that Google provides. And Google search algorithms are biased in favor of India at the expense of the neighboring countries, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, and of course, Pakistan. And there is nothing anywhere in the world that actually reports accurately what is happening, or at least partially, as to what is going on politically and socially, environmentally, economically, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, in Bangladesh. And India, which is fronted by the cabal of the fundamentalist Hindutva, BJP, Narendra Modi, has got strong links with the genocidist regime in Burma. As Modi showed in the wake of the 2017 reports about the Rohingyas being genocided and massacred. He flew to Rangoon, the capital town, which is now called Yangon, and he congratulated the head of the genocidist regime, Aung San Suu Kyi. Now, one of the direct kind of benefits that accrued to the advantage of the regime in Bangladesh was that because of the humanitarian crisis created by the million plus Rohingya people fleeing Burma. An international relief effort was put into action, and the money was given to the regime in Bangladesh as opposed to individual people running for their lives from Burma. That kind of money that the regime in Bangladesh was given under aid programs would not be made available to Bangladesh under ordinary circumstances, even during a period of 30 years. So that is the very high octane financial benefit that was made available to the government in Bangladesh, whatever the particular color. And the Bangladesh regime doesn't have an effective democratic opposition. Which means that whatever the ordinary failures, negligence and cruelty and lack of compassion and lack of democracy being perpetrated by the regime in Bangladesh, because there is no democracy to speak of, the absence of democracy and the absence of justice for the victims of mass rapes, Bangladesh has got one of the most horrific incidents of gang rapes, mass rapes committed. So these are not being reported internationally, not even 1% of it. The only presence online that is accessible by the biggest search engine, Google, is a dubious title called Dhaka Tribune, which is corrupt to the core and is part of the agenda of the regime. There is no other title based in Dhaka or based in Chittagong, which is the second biggest political center in Bangladesh. None of those events, mass rapes, gang rapes, and starvation and trafficking, mass trafficking of girls for prostitution, both within the country and outside the country into the big market for prostitution that has been expanding across the Middle East, the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, and other places. Bangladesh is a country which has got, in my estimate, because of the various factors involved, more than 200 million people. Because the census doesn't actually represent the accurate kind of numbers of people in the country. Well, census in this country doesn't either. Census in the UK, which has just happened in March, doesn't represent the truth about the actual number of people living in this country. never has done. Same applies to the inaccurate and misleading census carried out in other Western so-called countries, including the USA and Canada. So, a country with 200 million people plus, and in Pakistan you've got 230, 240 million people. So you've got 450 million people in those two countries. And then in India, and the main population, assuming the main population being Muslims, there are more than 200 million Muslims in India alone. So in the subcontinent of three countries, there are more than 500 million Muslims, and that is before you start to count the number of Hindus, which is much bigger. And I'm including the number of Hindus among the non-Muslim people in the subcontinent, the Dalits or the untouchables or the so-called scheduled castes, the people that the Hindus despise and don't recognize as belonging to the levels of humanity. And none of this is peripheral. 1.5 billion people, nearly 2 billion people in the subcontinent. I mean, Asia has got 6 billion people plus. And if you look at the Fleet Street papers, there is no recognition of that. Now that is how many times the population of the whole of Europe altogether? Many times over. And the behavior of these people, ordinary normal behavior, as well as the attitude about the climate, emergency, matters to what happens to the planet every day. And it is a known fact, has been a known fact, that Bangladesh is sinking. Now 200 million people in Bangladesh alone, where are they going to go? So the strife and the civil wars based on the climate change that is happening every day, that war is coming closer. Because whatever the regime, whatever the political kind of atmosphere in India, a sudden, which will be sudden, appearance of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, will not be something that could be treated without violating the rights and lives and safety of the hundreds of millions of people. So the subcontinent, since August 1947, has been treated as a forgotten region, but that's the central part of the world's population, the increasing numbers of population. And treating the daily melting of the environment, climate change, as if it's not happening, is suicidal on a massive scale. And what is happening now? But looking at the Fleet Street papers, apart from the Guardian today talking about Canada, which is a tokenistic piece by the Guardian today, because the Guardian is not talking about the role of the United Nations, the Security Council, the G7, and all the big pullers of the powers based on the agenda of robbery and corruption and criminality against the many. So, when I say that this diagnosis of Fleet Street, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, that is what I mean, or that is the main thing, or among the main things that I'm doing, carrying out the examination of the blank, empty, in denial role of the liars of Fleet Street. Now, the outcome of the Batley and Spen election that was announced early this morning, or earlier this morning, will be featured in the papers, Fleet Street papers, tomorrow, Saturday. And they will be telling lies about both the election and the impact and the implication. They will be lying, whatever the lies. Just like today's coverage of the unveiling of the statue of Diana by her two sons yesterday. I mean, the papers are focused on the fact, they're alleging that although the two brothers were there, their relationship between them was frosty. Now, there should not be that editorializing of the event. They should leave the two boys alone instead of stoking hostility and hatred and spite against each other and insinuating. So what they're doing, they're looking for any excuse, any pretext to keep on the appearance of these two brothers being at war with each other. They would not be at war with each other anywhere near as intensely as they are. But they are at war because the papers want them to be featured as being at war. So we shall be talking more about the impact of the two brothers on the memory and legacy of their mother. I mean, no mother should be tainted in that way in relation to her children. And especially not someone like Diana who has been tainted enough. If there is a kind of innocent part about it, it is that Diana is not involved and has not been involved for a quarter of a century in any of the things that have happened around the British monarchy and British society. And the joint statement that the two boys issued yesterday, of course, talks about the legacy that she has left and the benefit that her legacy has brought to many people, many people's lives. Why can't the newspapers, Fleet Street, concentrate on that? I mean, stoking hatred, misinformation, and intolerance between the two boys and the two boys' families now. I mean, what purpose does it serve? Except to meet the worst, lowest common kind of cravings for scandal and hostility that they're pandering to among the readers. Because if there was going to be a different kind of future for the monarchy, assuming that Diana was around and active, it would have been to humanize the monarchy, to open it up, and to make it almost acceptable on a moral ground, because it was not toxic and it was not contributing to the toxification of society. But due to the sick obsession with this toxic kind of factor by Fleet Street, Diana's legacy that could have been transformed with the reporting of her two sons without the toxic and the hostilities, that alternative, that option has been suffocated for the last 24 years by the Fleet Street. And the kind of claims made by her brother, Charles Spencer, against Martin Bashir. Notice this, Charles Spencer. I'm saying it. You have not fooled everyone. Your tactic has been to avoid mentioning anything critical that Diana had to say against the monarchy. You have focused on painting Diana as being paranoid against the royal family, as if the royal family was innocent and Diana, the victim of the royal family, was the wrong party. And because of Charles Spencer's involvement in the Martin Bashir kind of circus, the real fact and the truth about Diana's life and her treatment has been suppressed. And Williams, her elder son, has been given space by Fleet Street to join the defamation of his mother and call her paranoid. This was not really doing any service to the cause or causes that Diana actually would have supported. So the Bashir scandal has been used as a camouflage to further hide the lies and denials and cruelties perpetrated by the royal family. So that is what I have said to Charles Spencer today, and it will be updated in due course. Now here is a piece by somebody called John Thornhill in the Financial Times. It's the legacy of the Russian communist Lenin. The heading is Lenin's rope may help tame the dominance of big tech. Well, that is a very significant concession. Those struggling to curb the power of big tech should consider the theory of Vladimir Lenin's rope. When it comes to hang the capitalists, they will vie with each other for the rope contract, Lenin is supposed to have said, even if there is little evidence that he ever did. As regulators have recently been discovering it, it is tough challenging the dominance of the big tech companies. Last week, a United States federal court struck down 2 landmark law cases brought against Facebook. The court arguing that the Federal Trade Commission had failed to prove that the social network exercised monopoly power. Now, before going any further into that piece, I go back to the lies uttered by David Neuberger. In July 2017, so July 2017, 18, 19, 20, 24 calendar years ago, this very week, the London Evening, No Standard, Home Affairs editor, Martin Bentham promoted David Neuberger's statement supporting Brexit and peddling the myth, corruptly peddling the corrupt myth that the London law courts provided the best center for dispute resolution among big money foreigners. Of course, that is the case. But to promote that without saying that it's only available to big money and not available to ordinary people, the so-called many who have no money, is a crime in itself. And as I said yesterday in relation to the case brought against the City of London licensed law trader called Neil Gerard by the Kazakh company, the evidence, the only evidence that exists to support any aspect of David Neuberger's corrupt claim about London law courts is that those criminals who have millions, hundreds of millions of pounds to spend in order to shield from scrutiny their ill-gotten other millions do get to have their say against one another in the High Court in London. That is true. But that truth is not being recognized by this Financial Times writer who is writing about Lenin, the John Thornhill, is writing about Lenin's supposed statement to the fact that when the capitalists come to hang one another, supposedly in the case of a revolution, anti-capitalist revolution, the capitalists will vie with each other for the rope contract, because there will be so many capitalists being hanged by other capitalists in the case of the revolution, that the rope contract would become a big part of the commercial dealings among the capitalists. Now, then he says, this John Thornhill, that Facebook has influence now. He's got a US federal court to strike down 2 landmark law cases brought against Facebook. No rational assessment of the evidence concerned could conclude that federal court would strike down cases by making a false claim that the claims were the claimants had failed to prove that Facebook operated as a monopoly. Any ordinary person can see that Facebook is a monopoly. So the fact that this writer is not condemning the court, nor is he examining the sickness that rules the court system, proves the point of our diagnosis, that the courts are corrupt, as are the politicians, as are the parliaments, as are the governments, as indeed are the big techs. And all of those are lined up against the many, the ordinary people, the majority of the population. So where do the population go for redress? David Neuberger, the so-called president of the Supreme Court in England, well, the UK Supreme Court in July 2017 didn't have any time or indeed any interest in talking about the access to remedies through the court system that could be made available or denied to the many. And there lies another grave piece of evidence that the Labour Party has been politically murdered. And the murder process began before Keir Starmer took over as the so-called leader. This John Thornhill, let's check again if he has got any critical comment to make about the role and the behavior of the courts in the USA. Now, the rest of this piece by John Thornhill is shameless propaganda for the big techs. So he's not only not telling the truth about Lenin's rope, he is intentionally abusing the reference to Lenin to entice readers into his piece. And so there is nothing in the papers that tell the truth, as I have just outlined and exposed by examining the John Thornhill piece. There will never be, because newspapers have not brought about revolution. The Fleet Street papers have not brought about a revolutionary awareness about the shortcomings that dominate British society and keep the many in a variety of states of deprivation, denial, and ignorance. And we shall be talking more about all of those in the next part. This is the part that we shall end just under 1 hour length.